My dear friends, in the gospel we just heard, we are told that as Jesus was preaching in the synagogue at Capernaum, a poor, demented man came and created a scene. No? He cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us?" In effect, what the man was saying was, "Leave me alone. I am no good. I am evil. I am not worthy of love or care." Actually, it's a cry that we hear more than once in the gospel from people who believe they were possessed by devils. Don't meddle with us. Leave us alone. Don't try to change us. Now, we see that in saying that, they recognize that change is painful. And they're not ready for that, to change. Whether they were actually possessed by devils, that we don't know. But what we do know is that they were sick, they were broken, they were isolated, they were unloved people who had no dignity and whose self-worth was nil or nothing. Now, there are many people today in our world, similar people, in prisons, in psychiatric hospitals, in other places, other situations, and so on. Now, any of us also can be caught in some disparate, in the same disparate situation. Now, here we see that at least the man in the synagogue didn't try to hide how he was. He was open about it. He came to Jesus, and Jesus wasn't put off by his desperate cry. In the cry, "Leave me alone," Jesus heard another cry, the cry for help. And he cured him. He cured him. Now, we know that people often find it hard to admit that they can't manage their problems. Parang it's a kind of insult to their ego. And pride tells them, "I should be able to handle my own problems." So that's why it's not easy for them to be open about that. But yet, recognition that there is a problem is the first step towards rehabilitation. Unless, we recognize that we are entertaining a problem, it will be always hard to solve that problem. The acknowledgement of our weakness and need would open the way to recovery. That is why it is usually the courageous ones, the courageous people that go for counseling. Very often, when people come and then mayroon silang mga problems, and then of course it's beyond our domain or so what. So we recommend them to go for counseling. And it's not easy. It's not easy to convince them. By doing so, they admit that they can solve their problem on their own. So that's why nahirapan sila na pupunta to other persons. They have a hard time to accept that they need help from somebody else. Now, psychologists tell us that sometimes people don't really want to be cured. And why is this? Because a cure can be painful. A cure can be painful. It can involve a process which requires a lot of change, personal change. And all change, as we know, is painful. So the idea of recovery can even be terrifying. Now, often we are afraid to talk about something that is hurting us. No? And there is something is within our hearts, within our minds that is bothering us, hurting us. Sometimes we cannot open it up. We keep it locked up inside us where it festers. We may not say, "Leave me alone," but that is what it amounts to when we just keep it to ourselves. Para bang we are telling them, "You wouldn't know, and you couldn't possibly understand what I'm going through." And it is said that unvoiced suffering, unexpressed suffering, now is more harrowing than suffering that cries aloud. That cries aloud. A story was told that after the birth of her son, a young mother discovered that he was blind, that the child was blind. So you just could imagine the suffering that the mother was going through, realizing that her son was blind. So she called her family together and said, "I don't want my child to know that he is blind." So she insisted that from that point on, everyone should avoid using words such as light, color, and sight. So, ayun yan na they will include these words in the conversations, especially when the child was around. Now, the child grew up believing that he was like everyone else, until one day, strange thing happened. A strange girl jumped over the garden wall and used all the forbidden words. She used all the forbidden words. It's only then that the child realized who he was and what he was. Now, the story symbolizes much of our own behavior. We all seek to hide what is strange, what is painful, what is hurtful, and to act as if things are normal. We act as if we had no problems. We act as if we had no abnormalities, no pains, no wounds, no failures. The urge to hide is very powerful and can be more powerful even than what it tries to conceal, than what it tries to hide. However, when we have the courage to face our problems, something else happens, and new creative energies become available to us. Fear, shame, and guilt often make us stay in isolation. It is by showing our wounds, by allowing ourselves to touch and be touched, that we are healed. That we are healed. It is in our brokenness, it is in our woundedness that God comes to heal us. If we give Him a chance. If we give Him, He doesn't force. He is there to offer that help. So, it's necessary to open up. By the way, the situation of the sick man who approached Jesus in this gospel was a form of suffering. The fact that he was kind of possessed by an unclean spirit. He was tormented by that unclean spirit. In fact, this encounter of Jesus and the sick man was an act of great love and mercy. And it revealed the power and authority of Jesus. As we can see, the response of Jesus to actual suffering is very practical. Often we see him surrounded by throngs of physically and mentally sick people. And he gives himself to each of them, healing them one by one. He did not insulate himself against human pain, did not try to avoid encountering people who were sick, who had pains, who were undergoing problems. He made himself totally vulnerable before the wounded and before the sick. Suffering for Jesus was always an opportunity to show what God is like. He reveals the compassion of God in every encounter he had with the sick person. He revealed the compassion of God in the face of human suffering. Now, my dear friends, the suffering of others is also an opportunity for us. We may not be able to cure, we may not have the power to cure, but it is always within our power to care. It is always within our power to love. It is always within our power to empathize and sympathize. And to care is a very healing thing. Just to be with the sufferer is in itself a very worthwhile thing. But it's no easy thing either, because it means that instead of relieving someone's pain, we have to be prepared to share it. And that's painful. I have experienced that several times, being at this bedside of a suffering man or a dying man. Sometimes you have nothing to offer. Just being seated on the bedside. Very often we come to sufferers with empty hands. What can we do for them? We can use those empty hands precisely. We can use those empty hands for comforting. And all they often ask is that we do not leave them alone, that we do not desert them, that we stand. The other day I was very touched by a news that I was looking at, I was watching. A person who was declared positive COVID. And of course she had to be brought to a certain room where she did not like to go. And she was crying. She did not want. She knew that the moment they would enter that room, either she did not know if she would come back. It was painful to see that. even from afar. Now, how much more kung nasa side ka ba? Now, if you are at the side bed, or bedside, or whatever, near the person, must be, I was imagining, it must be very hard for those first responders, the nurses, the doctors, to be there in those moments. And the person is struggling, to get out of that situation. So this is what they are often asking us, just be there. Just be there. Do not desert them. All they ask is that we stand our ground at the foot of the cross, just like the Blessed Mother did on Calvary. That we stand our ground. Simply be there. That is in some ways is the hardest thing. Just to be there. The one thing the sufferer longs for is our power to give human warmth. A sick person can be healed, without being cured. Healing is something internal. A sick person can be healed without being cured. So, my dear friends, as we continue our celebration of the Holy Eucharist, let us pray through our own sufferings we may learn to feel the sufferings of others and show them compassion.